The approach to public order policing has been inconsistent and, too often, too weak. There was inaction in the face of blatant criminality during the anti-Israel protests. And the justification for not wanting to ban these marches was that the threshold in the Public Order Act 1986 was not reached. But if the Chief Constable did not believe banning the marches would prevent serious public disorder, how could they later claim that arresting lawmakers, how could they later claim that arresting lawbreakers at the time would lead to wider disorder? This is quite obviously a contradiction. Last week, we saw a senior officer from West Midlands Police explain that officers had been absent during violence by young Muslim men because they had discussed their plans with, and I quote, community leaders to understand the style of policing we needed to deliver. Now, criminal acts committed during protests, whether by Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, or the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, were not stopped, with police seeming to stand aside by the wayside. And in Birmingham, police deferred to so-called community leaders while pubs and cars were attacked, windows broken and citizens intimidated. This is not, as the police oath requires, policing without fear or favour. No police officer should ever tolerate the presence of a militia, no matter what the provocation or the cause they claim. The intrusion of politics, the politics of protest, or the politics of the self-appointed community leaders into policing must simply end. We need a new programme of police reform to make sure that it does. The institutions of policing should be reviewed and reformed, including the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council. The culture of police leadership, how leaders are recruited, trained and rewarded, must change. The structure of policing, not least the Met's confused mix of national and local responsibilities, and its reporting to the Mayor and the Home Secretary, with each blaming the other, must also change. Removing counter-terrorism policing from the Met to create a new national security police force whose focus is not just counter-terror, but also state threats, would be one way of doing so. Our response to conspiracy theories and disinformation, and our response to the truth, when those in authority find it inconvenient, cannot be silence. The antidote to conspiracy is transparency, and transparency is vital to knowledge. Where possible, the police, subject to the protection of the right to a fair trial, should err towards sharing more information, not less. Because silence feeds lies and allows our enemies to exploit the darkness and to spread disinformation and to try to divide us. In the criminal justice system, we also need change. It is true that we do not have the capacity in the prison estate that we need. There's little point in spending vast sums on more police officers who arrest more criminals only to see them be given trivial or non-custodial sentences. Research shows that only 1/10 of criminals commit more than half of all crimes. And even with this group, a number of super-prolific criminals are responsible for an even greater share. The first rioters to be convicted sum up this problem. Derek Drummond had 14 previous convictions from 19 offences and a history of violence. Declan Gearan had 13 previous convictions from 18 offences. Adam Wharton had 16 previous offences from 26 offences, including robbery and burglary. As more people are prosecuted, we are likely to find many repeat offenders amongst them. Now, according to research compiled by my friend Neil O'Brien MP, the number of offenders with more than 50 previous convictions who were convicted but not sent to prison rose from 1,299 in 2007 to 3,196 in 2018. The number of offenders with more than 100 convictions but who still avoided jail doubled to 295. Over the years of Neil's study, 206,000 criminals with 25 previous convictions avoided prison for their next offence, and instead, more were handed community sentences. Now, this is madness, and under Labour, the problem is only going to get worse. Just as he is set to raise taxes, Keir Starmer is doing here what he fundamentally believes in. In this case, releasing criminals early, while pretending that he is forced to do so because that is the inheritance from the Tories. Now, we know it's nonsense for two reasons. First, he chose to appoint a prisons minister, Lord Timpson, who thinks that only 1/3 of current prisoners should be behind bars. And second, since the riots, the government has done what it had previously said was impossible. It's created an extra 567 prison places from within the existing estate. Yet the government's mass prisoner release scheme doesn't start until September. Now, nobody denies that there are problems with prison capacity, and of course we should be better at prisoner rehabilitation and much better at probation. But prison punishes offenders and takes dangerous and prolific criminals out of circulation, allowing the rest of us to live in peace. We should be updating and improving our prisoners, not releasing criminals. So as well as police reform, we need probation and prison reform. And we do need more prison capacity. But we also need to look a little deeper at the kind of society that we have become. The story of the last 2 weeks is not only one of violence and destruction, it's a story of a nation divided, the result of social unrest we've allowed to percolate below the surface. A story of a senseless, horrific crime against innocent children, of people quick to believe baseless claims that a perpetrator was an illegal immigrant and a Muslim, of people taking to the streets and targeting innocents on the basis of their race and their religion, of thugs so wrapped up in the thrill of destruction that they attacked their own neighbourhoods, of vigilantes forming groups and attacking innocent people themselves, of police officers openly admitting that they defer to unelected, unaccountable community leaders, and politicians of right and left picking and choosing who they condemn instead of upholding the rule of law. Sadly, this is not the first warning sign. We can go back to the riots in northern English towns in 2001 and read the Cantle report that followed. We can read the Casey report of 2016 and find the same conclusions. Cantle argued separate educational arrangements, community and voluntary bodies, employment, places of worship, language, social and cultural networks means that many communities operate on the basis of a series of parallel lives. Casey found discrimination and disadvantage, feeding a sense of grievance and unfairness, isolating communities from modern British society. She also found high levels of social and economic isolation in some places and cultural and religious practices that hold citizens back and run contrary to British values and sometimes to our laws. We could commission another report following these riots. We already know what it would find. Now, I'll address the economic challenges another time, but for now, let me say that too many people live in communities shorn of civic pride and social capital. Too many have lost their sense of self as they are denied opportunity and purpose in their lives. Many people are told, in effect, that they are not needed, that they have too little to contribute. They are parked on benefits and forgotten. And social trust is collapsing. Instead of trying to build a sense of national unity under one civic identity, through a common culture, solidarity, and a shared understanding of the obligations, not just the rights of citizenship, we have, for decades, pursued the opposite, promoting difference between communities instead of shared values and shared beliefs. In recent years, we've seen this policy turbocharged. We've seen equality of opportunity give way to critical race theory, while the root causes of inequalities go ignored. Activist groups warp the language of inclusion to get what they want. Universities indulge in ideologies of grievance instead of transmitting knowledge. Schools, museums, and galleries apologize for our country's history instead of objectively explaining it and, yes, celebrating it. We have seen interethnic tensions and violence in Liverpool 2 weeks ago, in Leicester 2 years ago, and in other towns and cities before and since. We have seen sectarianism in our elections and even in the House of Commons. After years of militant identity politics, much of it imported, we have seen the politicisation of race by extremists and thugs. The right response to this cannot be more of the same. Yet we've already seen more than enough from Labour to know that that is exactly what we're going to get. Ministers are promising a legal definition of Islamophobia, creating a blasphemy law for one faith when anti-Muslim hatred is already a crime. This will undermine free speech, afford special protections uniquely to the beliefs of one religion, and protect extremists from scrutiny and investigation. And we can already see that activists on the left are trying to use the riots to silence those with mainstream concerns about immigration. We need a government that unites, not divides, that recognises that all citizens are equal and represented by the structures of our democracy, not by sectarian affiliations or self-appointed community leaders. We need patriotism and purpose, the patriotism that sees us all part of one nation, and the purpose of seeing the goal of our shared prosperity and security. And we need to end the culture of denial, the tendency to move hurriedly on from acts of extreme violence to obfuscate about the identities and motives of the perpetrators, and to take comfort in the mantra of diversity. The truth is, diversity can bring many great advantages, but it also brings many great challenges that need to be successfully navigated. Denial creates a vacuum in which extremists of all kinds and claiming to represent different ethnic and religious identities can divide us. So the mission must be for those of us in the mainstream to lead, to tell the truth about the scale of the challenges, to admit that too many people live without opportunity, purpose, or hope, to admit that too many of our towns and cities are divided, to admit that the politics of sectarianism, the emphasis on what sets us apart rather than what brings us together, has failed, and to accept that unless we do this differently, things will not get better and could yet get much worse. But this is not a counsel of despair. If we're honest with ourselves, the solutions will follow the reform of our police and criminal justice system, the renewal and, in some cases, replacement of our national institutions, the restoration of pride in our community and our country, its history and its culture, the rejection of militant identity politics in all its forms, the construction of a new economic model, and the promise of a new social contract in which we understand our obligations as well as our rights, and we all have the respect and the self-respect that comes with fending for ourselves, providing for our families, and contributing to our common life together. It will take honesty, and it will take courage, and it will take leadership. But of course it can be done, because what needs to be done in the national interest must be done. And because this is Britain, my country, your country, the greatest country on earth. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire. I can't see you, but I'm sure you're here. Oh, there you are. Sorry, forgive me. Claire, Daily Mail.
I was just wondering, you talked about the sort of disinformation
Yep.
with the riots. How would you go about policing social media and making it a better place to stop this kind of disinformation?
So we've already set out in the Online Safety Act, which of course was passed recently. But we also need to recognise that when social media platforms make decisions to publish or emphasise or boost content, they are making a decision. And we need to recognise that decisions matter. Helen, I can see you there.
You talked about doing serious research. How much responsibility, if any, do you think your party should take for the situation we find ourselves in?
Well, let's be honest, this is not a single incident. It's part of a pattern, as I described. It's, the Cantor report, the Casey report, these go back decades. We all have a responsibility. And the reality is it's not just central government either. We can see that different communities, different leadership levels in this country have had different challenges. So this is something that we need to do as a nation. I don't want to be partisan about this. This isn't a partisan statement. This is about making sure that we govern this country, our great country, for the benefit of all. And sadly, the riots have just demonstrated that that's not working. Christian, where are you? Is Calgie here? Oh, there you are, buddy. I can't believe I missed you. Sorry. That's, must be the first time that's ever happened.
Mass immigration, segregated communities, lack of prison places, weak justice for criminals, importing identity politics from abroad, looking at cracking down on freedom of speech, collapsing social trust. This was just a shopping list of Tory failure, wasn't it? Or are you really going to change the party to be radical enough to get things right next time you're in power?
Look, this is a list of areas that we must improve on. And it's not Tory or Labour. It's a list of areas that this country must get better at. And this is not just, as I say, this is not just about central government. This is about operational leadership of police officers at every level. This is about the leadership that we see in the devolved administrations and in devolved mayoralties and areas like that over the coming years. We need to actually focus on what we're talking about here. Focus on the areas that divide us. Focus on the sectarian politics that have separated us. Because we know, we've seen, I'm afraid, that you can import, if you like, you can import division, you can import ideas of separateness, or you can remember who you are. One of the great things about this country, one of the things I love about this country, is we don't qualify Britishness. We're not like some countries where you're a hyphenated nation. You're just British, and we should be deeply proud of that. Tamara, there you are, thank you.
Hi. Can you be more specific about this culture of denial you're talking about? You gave some examples of Islamist extremism. Is that what you're saying governments have been in denial about? And what did you try and do about that when you worked at the Home Office? And can I also ask, are you saying that these pro-Palestine marches you've seen should have been banned or just more aggressively policed?
So look, when I was the security minister, one of the things I was working on was on the political influence that we see through different areas on our own country. And we've seen that, some of it by the kind of hostile states that you've heard me talking about many times, and we've also seen it, sadly, through different groups who are seeking to weaponize culture or faith in different ways. And we need to be absolutely clear that politics in this country is conducted by the free association of free people, by British citizens getting together. It is not conducted. It is absolutely unacceptable that it's conducted by anybody trying to influence from abroad. And that's exactly why I set up the Defending Democracy Task Force. So that's exactly where my focus went. Now, on the pro-Gaza marches, I was pretty clear at the time, and I remain clear, that if the police are going to take an operational decision that they say is in accord with the Public Order Act 1986, then the consequences that follow is that the actions on that march must be in line with the Public Order Act, and they weren't. Yes, sorry, forgive me, I've got a list here. Laura, there you are. Thank you.
Can I ask on disinformation? If ministers were to revise powers...
I'm sorry, forgive me, I couldn't hear you there.
If ministers were to revise powers to compel social media companies to remove legal but harmful content, is that something you would support, or is it something you have free speech related concerns about?
So I have concerns about freedom of speech across society, but the freedom to shout fire in a crowded theatre, I mean, you probably learned in your journalist legal training, is not the same as the, freedom of speech is not unqualified. The truth is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, it's the ability to associate and to share ideas. And we need to be very careful that when we say various freedoms are limited, that it's not just being wrong that is limited. It's not just being mistaken that's limited. It's when you're actively doing harm. And that's where we've got to balance these rights. And frankly, some of the reporting online and social media about some of these different incidents has been, frankly, stretching the truth quite markedly. It isn't just that somebody said something, it's that they also recommended how to attack, how to do harm, how to bring violence to individuals. That's not the same. Noah, where are you? Oh, there you are. Sorry, forgive me.
So you did criticise Keir Starmer a bit for waiting a week before he convened the Cobra meeting. However, the Prime Minister has received praise from some quarters in the space of a week, and on Wednesday there was meant to be a whole lot more, and that didn't transpire. Would you give him any credit at all, or do you think he's completely failed, and how much more quickly and better would you have acted?
So look, I think the example is one that Keir Starmer should have known very well. He was, after all, Director of Public Prosecutions in 2011. He was actually there. And David Cameron immediately called Cobra, did so every day, and made sure the police had the resources. I think, I may have not quite got the numbers wrong, but I think it was 16,000 officers he put on the streets. And those riots stopped within a week. These riots went on longer and they were less serious. He could have gripped it. He chose not to use the institutions of the state and still to run as though he was in opposition. That's not how government works. Nick, where are you? Oh, there you are. Sorry.
You mentioned on the marches, you had to instruct the police when you were a minister to go in and make arrests on the day.
Sorry, ministers can't instruct officers to make arrests.
Encouraged, shall I
Yeah.
say. I just wondered, do you think that police have effectively become too frightened to intervene in some of these events? And why do you think that's the case?
So look, this is the point I was setting out in the speech. It's the politics that have intervened in protest. And it's not just the politics, as in partisan politics, that we see in Westminster, but it's the politics of having community leaders or feeling that other areas are able to be dealt with later. And that's why I was clear time and again with senior police officers. And let me be quite clear, I have nothing but praise for the individual officers on the ground who show remarkable courage whenever there's protest and whenever there's unrest. I mean, it's extraordinary courage to go into the street and seek to keep us all safe. But in senior officers who did not take the decision to carry out arrests on the day. And what I point to here is the incoherence of that decision. If the protests can go ahead under the Public Order Act, then so can the arrests. Chris.
Quick questions. Would you allow Nigel Farage into your party? You've been talking in the past. Joy, you said too many people live in communities shorn of pride. Shouldn't you say sorry after 14 years in power as your party? And just finally, 3 in 5 voters don't care who comes lead of your party. Does that worry you?
So, first of all, this is a speech about some rather important events that have happened in our country over the last few days. It's not about our party. I'm very happy to answer the 2 questions that you asked about that, which is no, and we need to rebuild trust, and that's why I'm standing. But we'll move on from that. The real question that you asked...
No on Farage.
Sorry?
No on Farage.
Yeah. The real question, or rather the question you sandwiched in order to get the other 2 in, let's be honest, was about how do we handle this, right? And we need to make sure that what we're doing is we are changing the way that we look at policing across the UK, but also we look at the way that we treat the economy. And this is why I was so supportive of the Levelling Up agenda. This is why I was so supportive of investment. Because if you look at these communities, if you look at these towns, you can see time and again that the level of joblessness in these communities has either flatlined or in some cases increased. That the level of personal GDP increase has been 0 and in fact in some cases negative. And so what we're seeing is a pattern of civic and economic failure, not over a few years, but actually over many generations in some cases. And that's something that we've got to get right. Claudia. Oh, there you are. Thank you.
So you've chosen to give this speech today when the riots are already over, instead of offering your input about what you say Starmer should have been doing when you say he should have been doing it. If you want to be leader of the opposition and you say Starmer should respond to the riots faster, should you not be faster in holding the government to account?
So, first of all, I did comment at the time online, but I'm giving this speech now because we actually have the time to reflect. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do when a government should be, even if it isn't, but should be entirely focused on keeping the King's peace, is to allow them to do it. Now, I did actually stay in touch with current ministers, and I did make sure that I was sharing thoughts as to how they could do better. But as you can imagine, they were a little focused elsewhere. Rowena, where are you? Oh, there you are. Thanks. So, frankly, I found those comments delusional and simply false. The question as to how we operate on social media is a difficult one. It's one of the reasons that many of us have to make different decisions. I refuse to be on TikTok because the algorithm is set by a foreign dictatorship. Others make different choices. David. There you are. Sorry, thank you.
To what extent do you think foreign disinformation is actually driving what's happening in the country at the moment? How do you think Putin is watching what's happening in Russia?
So I think Putin's a little distracted right now. But the reality is that I don't think this is driven by foreign disinformation. I think foreign actors try to exploit it. So it's not that they're actually creating the situation, it's that once the situation is created, they're seeking to pour fuel onto a fire. And that's what we've got to be incredibly conscious of. And that's the work that we were doing as part of the Defending Democracy Task Force. And I'm very glad that Dan Jarvis is continuing it. Will. Oh, there you are. Thanks, mate. Yeah.
Just picking up the question on Elon Musk, what do you think the government should do about him and his leadership of X specifically? And if you were elected party leader, would you be willing to stand up to him and other tech billionaires? And do you think we need further regulation of these social media platforms?
So I've already set out my support for the Online Safety Act. I think, you know, foreign companies with foreign ownership and foreign leadership are responsible to themselves. I mean, it's quite right that we could criticise, but I mean, it's up to the shareholders. And in this case, there's one shareholder, and it's him, as far as I know. So it really is a decision for them. I think advertisers are making pretty clear their views, and others may well follow. James Heal. No? Jolly good. Stefan?
Yeah.
There you are. Hey.
When you were security minister, did you have, or were you given any information that suggested that there was a heightened risk of violence from violent groups and extremists? And if so, why wasn't more done to clamp down on these groups when you were in government?
So I'm not going to talk about information I may or may not have had. I'm sorry, Stefan. I'm not going there. Jessica. City. Oh, there you are. Thanks.
You suggested counter-terrorism policing should be taken from and what do you think this would be better, and where do you think that has fallen short on counter-terrorism?
So this is something I've been recommending actually since 2022, I think it was, and something that I came to realise more and more during my time in the Home Office, that the Metropolitan Police have two responsibilities, and they're both incredibly important. One is policing our great capital. That's a huge responsibility. It's extremely difficult. And some fantastic Met Police officers quite literally risk their lives every day to do that in a most extraordinarily courageous way. The second responsibility is a different one, which is to be the national champion for certain areas of policing, whether that's counterterrorism or responding to state threats. Now, the reality is over recent years, you don't need me to tell you this, many of you have reported it, state threats have increased. We've seen, I think I'm up to date when I say 15 serious life-threatening incidents by Iranian agents here in the United Kingdom. We've had to pass the National Security Act in recent years, which I got through Parliament, which meant that in my time as security minister, we arrested more Russian and Chinese agents than the previous decade. You know, we have had to take really serious decisions, which has changed the nature of how we have to look at policing. And that's why I argue that something like the National Security Police as a separate standalone force that was able to respond to these threats, not just in London, but around the United Kingdom, is incredibly important. The leadership of the counterterrorism police is frankly exceptional, and I believe that they could do more. Carl.
Carl Linden might be used. You said that if Keir Starmer had chaired COBRA more often, he could have given the police more than what they needed. Do you have any evidence from the police that they lack resources or powers to deal with these riots? You also talk about an inconsistent approach to public order policing. Isn't that the same as a two-tier approach?
So let me start with the second one. No, it's not the same. A two-tier approach suggests that there's an active choice to treat communities differently. I don't believe that's the case. I believe what there is there's inconsistency. Inconsistency leads to lack of predictability. If there were, for example, if there were a protest today in London, can you be certain that it will be handled in one way or another? Can you be sure that it will be handled like the Gaza protests or like other protests? I can't. There's an inconsistency there. And we need to make sure that there is consistency. That helps police officers know how they can act, but it also helps the public know how they can feel safe. The second is, on resourcing and powers, no, the police have the resources and the powers. This is about leadership. And the truth is, COBRA is not just about making sure you get a bit more money from the Treasury or a bit more money from or a bit more support from the Army. It's about making sure that the entire focus of government is on the single issue of the day. And frankly, if your entire focus during riots is not on keeping the King's peace, your focus is wrong. Anna, I've lost. Oh, there you are. Thank you.
You talk about inconsistency of policing. Do you believe that inconsistency is kind of consistently directed at certain groups rather than others? As in, do you think the police treat certain groups differently to the way they treat other groups?
You're pushing me down a yes, Prime Minister route. There is no consistent inconsistency. They are inconsistent. And their inconsistency is what makes them consistent. Are there any other questions? Henry, sorry.
I have two questions, but they are both on topic. First, in 2016, the government in the Right Damages Act recommitted to the principle that the police should be financially liable for damage.
That's right.
However, the police can get around this liability by not referring to disorderly riots. How, after 8 years in government, is that loophole not caught? And what would you do about it? Second, on your idea of a new national security police, we are having a speech as a response to public order, and yet you've only mentioned counter-terrorism. Would your new security police force include the TSG and public order laws, or would you focus purely on counter-terrorism?
So on the first question, look, the financial consequences for policing of rioting can be very high, and you're right that police forces choose language carefully to avoid the consequences. And that's why I think it should be determined independently rather than by the individual force. But the reality is that the real challenge is not a financial one, it's a leadership one, as I say again. And that's where, I think we need to be very clear that the leadership of individual officers and the leadership training that individual police leaders get is so important. That's why I talk about the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing, both of which do important work, but renewal and reform is important as well. And so when we look at the national security policing, I put in there those areas that are genuinely national, that are actually cross UK policing elements. You could include some TSG elements, but actually what's often more important than the officers in the front line, which require remarkable courage, is the support element, that search of either social media or state actors to make sure that the support is there to make sure that before an incident occurs, it can be dealt with. Yes?
Kate Dublin from The Independent. So the difference with the riots this time around, many experts argue, is the role of social media. Would you support an inquiry that would specifically look at the role of social media? And if I may, how do you think Keir Starmer is dealing with the current threat from Iran?
So on the social media question, do you remember what was described as the cause of the riots in 2011? It was BlackBerry Messenger. Right? I mean, there will always be a system of communication that is responsible for the latest outbreak of whatever it is, right? That's not the core. The core is the leadership in response and understanding that communities divided lead to significant unrest. And so there are two issues here. The first is how do we address the division in our society, and the second is how do we address police leadership, I'm afraid. On Iran, I'm afraid I'm not going to comment on that. And the reason I'm not going to comment, because it is an entirely fair question, is that this is an extremely tense moment. The behaviour of the Iranian state in recent years has been unbelievably threatening and could lead to very, very serious harm, not just to us and to our friends, but to many others in the region. Let's not forget, this is, after all, the regime that has murdered quite literally hundreds of thousands of people in Syria and has tried to bring death to many, many others around the world. So I will keep my counsel on that, if you don't mind. Yes.
You said to Chris that you wouldn't allow Nigel Farage to join the Conservative Party, but would you rule out doing it in the UK?
Yes. Forgive me, my hearing isn't.
Sorry, I'll stand up. You talked about a culture of denial, and one of the elements of the attacks in Southport was that it was violence against
Absolutely.
girls. We've seen the stabbing of an 11-year-old girl in London just yesterday. How do you think you can address this?
Yeah, look, I don't know how many of you were watching the TV and the various social media in the last day or two, but there was a photo of one of the children who was murdered, and it was quite clearly her first Holy Communion photo. My daughter's 7 and is going to do her first Holy Communion, well, I hope, this year. It was absolutely heartbreaking to see it. It's one of the most painful images that I think any of us have seen, and anybody who's a parent, anybody who's got nephews, nieces, will understand that it's just agonizing. And the horror for those people and for that family, I can't imagine it. And I was incredibly impressed by the leadership in Southport, actually. Councillor Thomas de Freitas got all the political parties together in what I have to say was an extremely impressive act of unity to condemn that horrific violence. I think this is one of those moments where it goes beyond politics, it goes beyond anything. It is simple horror of the actions committed against 3 innocent and frankly angelic children. Forgive me, I must now leave you, but thank you very much indeed for coming this afternoon. I'm very grateful for your time.